I had been a widow for 11 months when I saw my dead husband pour a glass of champagne for another woman. It was at a wedding, not mine, not anyone I knew well, a distant cousin's reception I almost didn't attend because grief makes you cancel things. I was standing near the edge of the garden with a glass of water I wasn't drinking, half listening to a toast, when I glanced across the lawn toward the bar. And there he was. Michael, my husband, the man I had buried 11 months earlier, whose empty casket I had chosen, whose eulogy I had written through tears, whose debts I was still drowning in. He was standing at a bar 40 feet away in a suit I didn't recognize, laughing, relaxed, tan, alive, pouring champagne for a woman in a green dress who leaned into him the way a woman leans into a man she belongs to. The garden tilted. The sound went far away. I remember gripping the back of a chair so I wouldn't fall. And then, this is the part I need you to understand, the part that saved me. Underneath the shock, underneath the horror, a second feeling rose up. A cold, still, familiar feeling. Because I'm a hospice nurse. I have sat with more than 100 people as they died. I know what death does to a room. I know its weight, its silence, the specific texture of real absence. And in 11 months of grieving my husband, some quiet professional part of me had never once felt that texture. His death had never felt like the deaths I knew. Now I understood why. He wasn't dead. He had left and he had made me bury him to do it. I didn't scream. I didn't cross that lawn. I turned very calmly, and I walked to my car, and I sat in the parking lot with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I made myself think one clear thought. Don't let him know you know. Let me take you back. My name is Grace. I've spent 19 years as a palliative care nurse, which means my whole life has been about sitting with people in their most honest hour, the hour when the pretending stops, when people finally say the true thing. It made me good at reading people, or so I thought. I met Michael when I was 34 and had mostly made peace with being alone. He was a financial advisor, warm and quick and easy, in a way I wasn't, and he pursued me with a focus that felt, at the time, like being finally seen. He liked that I was a nurse. You take care of everyone, he used to say. Let me be the one who takes care of you. I should have heard it differently. Let me be the one who takes care of you is a beautiful thing to say, and a dangerous thing to mean, depending on the man. From the right man, it's love. From the wrong man, it's the first move in taking control of your life. We married, and true to his word, Michael took care of everything, which meant, within 2 years, that Michael controlled everything. The accounts, the mortgage, the investments, the retirement I'd been quietly building since my 20s, which he consolidated into his management for efficiency. Whenever I asked a question about money, he had the same gentle, slightly amused answer. Gracie, you heal people. Leave the numbers to me. You wouldn't understand half of it, and you don't need to. And God help me, I believed him. I was tired. I worked brutal hours holding dying strangers' hands. It was such a relief to think one part of my life was being handled by someone who loved me. I didn't understand the numbers. He was right about that. He just never imagined I'd learn. The cracks, when I look back, were all there. I just read them as stress instead of as a man building an escape hatch. In the last year before he died, Michael changed. Distracted, secretive, on his phone at odd hours, taking calls in the garage. Twice I found paperwork he swept away too quickly. Once I answered a call meant for him, from a name I didn't know, a man with a smooth voice, who hung up the second he realized I wasn't Michael. Michael said it was a client. Michael always had an answer, and the answer was always delivered with just enough warmth to make me feel small for having asked. There was money trouble too, though I only learned the shape of it later. Michael had made bad bets. Worse than bad. He'd lost client money, his own money, our money. He was, I would eventually discover, hundreds of thousands of dollars underwater and sinking, with people beginning to ask questions he couldn't answer. A man like Michael, cornered, doesn't confess. He doesn't sit his wife down and say, I've failed us, let's face it together. A man like Michael looks at the woman who trusts him, the woman with a spotless credit history and a nurse's steady salary and a life insurance policy, and he starts to see her not as a partner. He starts to see her as an exit. The night they told me he was gone, it was raining. His car had gone off a coastal road, through a guardrail, into deep water. They found the car. They found his phone, his wallet, his wedding ring in the center console. They did not find him. The current there was strong, they explained gently, and in cases like this, sometimes the body is never recovered. They were so kind about it. They handed me a plastic bag with his wedding ring in it, and called it a recovery. I planned a funeral around an empty casket. I stood up in front of 200 people and spoke about a man I thought I'd known. I accepted their casseroles and their hugs. I began the long gray work of grief. The thing I can't forgive, of all the things, this is the one, is the eulogy. I sat up for 3 nights writing it, trying to distill 12 years of a man into words that would honor him. I wrote about his kindness. I wrote about the way he'd said, "Let me be the one who takes care of you." I stood at that podium, and I sobbed, telling a room full of people that I had been the luckiest woman alive to be loved by him, while he was, at that exact moment, somewhere warm, alive, tanning, reading my grief in the online guest book if he bothered to look at all. I gave the most honest performance of pain of my life over a man who was watching me do it from behind a fake death certificate. He let me stand up and mourn him. He let me tell 200 people I'd been lucky. That's not something a person does by accident, in a panic. That's something a person watches. And underneath it all, quietly, professionally, something in me itched, because I'd been in 100 rooms with real death, and this didn't have the weight. Grief is supposed to have a bottom to it, a terrible solid floor you eventually hit. Mine didn't. Mine kept feeling like a room I'd walked into where the person had just stepped out. I told myself I was in denial. I told myself grief takes strange forms. I was not in denial. My instincts were the only thing in my life still telling me the truth. Not condolences. Debts. It turned out my financially brilliant husband had left behind a mountain of them. And worse, that many of them had my name on them. Credit lines I'd never opened. A second mortgage I'd never signed, except apparently I had, or my signature had. Loans against the retirement I thought was still mine. The life insurance policy I'd expected to at least keep me afloat was frozen the moment the insurer's investigators flagged the circumstances of his death as pending review. No body, large policy, recent financial distress. They don't pay quickly on a death that convenient. So there I was, 11 months a widow, no husband, no insurance, no savings, and $100,000 of debt in my own name that I hadn't known existed. Collectors calling during my shifts, the bank sending letters about the house. Michael's former colleagues suddenly distant, some of them, I realized later, because they suspected what I couldn't yet let myself believe. I started picking up extra shifts, doubles, nights, holidays, not because I wanted to, but because the alternative was losing the house I'd have to sell anyway. I stopped buying anything that wasn't food or gas. I sold my mother's ring. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. after a 14-hour shift, still in my scrubs, moving the same not enough money between the same overdue columns, doing exactly the kind of desperate arithmetic Michael had always told me I wasn't smart enough to do. And the cruelest part was the shame. Because everyone looked at me with such pity. Our Grace, first she loses him, now this, and underneath the pity, I could feel the other thing people don't say out loud, the quiet suspicion that maybe I'd been careless, maybe I should have known, maybe a smarter wife would have seen it coming. I carried his crime as my failure. That's the part that hardens something in you, not the money, the shame that belongs to someone else. I was being buried, slowly, financially, completely. He had stepped out of his life and left me standing in the wreckage of it, holding the bill. And then I went to that wedding, and I saw him pour champagne for a woman in green. I didn't sleep the night after the wedding, but by morning, the shaking had stopped, and what was left was the cold, clear thing. I did not call the police first. I want to be honest about that, because people ask. I didn't call the police first, because I had spent a year learning exactly how convincing Michael was, how easily he produced an answer, how good he was at making me look like the confused, emotional one. If I called anyone screaming my dead husband is alive, I knew precisely how that would sound, and precisely how he'd spin it. A grief-stricken widow, unwell, imagining things. So instead, I did the one thing Michael had spent our whole marriage assuring me I couldn't do. I found someone who understood the numbers. A nurse I worked with, whose own divorce had been a war, gave me a name and said, She's the one you want. She's quiet, she's sharp, and she does not lose. So I made an appointment with an attorney named Diane Okafor. I told Diane everything: the wedding, the empty casket, the debts in my name, the frozen insurance, the nurse's instinct that had never let go. She listened without interrupting, taking careful notes, her face giving away nothing. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me questions I didn't expect. Not about the affair, not about the woman in green. About the money, where exactly Michael had worked, how the accounts were structured, whether I'd ever heard him mention offshore transfers, or a name. She slid a piece of paper across the desk with a name written on it, and asked if I'd ever heard it. I hadn't, but something cold moved through me, because it was a man's name, and the handwriting on that paper meant Diane had written it before I walked in, like she'd been expecting it. "Grace," she finally said, taking off her glasses, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hold it carefully. What your husband did to you, I've seen it before, not similar, the same structure of hidden debt, the same convenient accident, no body recovered, the same offshore shell holding the money he thinks he'll quietly reclaim once the dust settles." She tapped the name on the paper. "This is the third time in 2 years I've seen this exact fingerprint. 3 different men, 3 vanished deaths, 3 wives left holding the debt. Your husband didn't invent this, Grace. Somebody taught it to him. Somebody sells this, and I have been waiting a long time for a client who could help me prove it." She leaned forward. "But that's the long game. Here's your game. And your husband, brilliant as he thinks he is, has made one catastrophic mistake. He had himself declared dead," Diane said. "That was the whole plan. Die on paper, escape the debt, collect through the offshore structure, start over as a ghost with a green dress girlfriend in a warm climate. It's elegant. It's also fatally stupid, because a dead man, Grace, owns nothing. I didn't understand yet. She walked me through it. Legally, Michael is deceased. That means everything that was his is now part of his estate, and you, his widow, are the primary beneficiary of that estate. That offshore account he's so proud of, the moment we can identify it, it doesn't belong to Michael anymore. It can't. Michael doesn't legally exist. It belongs to the estate. It belongs, functionally, to you." She let that sink in. He built himself a treasure chest, and then made himself legally incapable of ever opening it. The only way Michael can reclaim that money is to walk into a government office and prove he's alive, and the second he does that, he's confessing to faking his death, I said slowly, and insurance fraud, and the debts in my name become his crimes, not yours. Identity theft, fraud, faking a death to escape creditors. That's not a messy divorce, Grace. That's federal. The moment he proves he's alive to get his money, he's arrested, and if he stays dead to stay free, he can never touch a cent of it. Diane smiled, slow and cold. "We don't chase him. We don't confront him. We freeze the chest and we wait. Because sooner or later, he's going to need his money, and when he reaches for it, we'll be standing there. Fight quiet. Don't warn him. Let him walk to the edge of the cliff he built himself." It took 4 months. 4 months of me going to work, holding dying patients' hands, coming home to a house the bank was circling, and saying nothing. Diane and a forensic accountant traced the money, through the shell company, through the name on that paper, to an offshore account holding nearly $600,000. We froze it, quietly, through the estate, with a court order Michael would have no idea existed until he tried to move it. And then we waited for him to reach for it. The waiting nearly undid me. Every day I went to work and put on the calm face my patients needed, and every night I came home to a silent house, and a phone I was terrified would ring, and a bank that was very much still circling. Twice during those months I almost broke. Once, a collector called during a shift, threatening to garnish the wages of a dying woman's nurse over a debt I hadn't incurred, and I locked myself in a supply closet and shook. I called Diane. She said the same thing every time, in the same steady voice. "He built the trap, Grace. Not us. We just have to be patient enough to let him walk into it. Can you be patient a little longer?" And I could, because the only thing stronger than my fear was the memory of him pouring champagne for a woman in green while I paid for his funeral. Once, I thought he was on to me. A message from an unknown number. Just the word Gracie, The old pet name, testing the water, and I stared at it for an hour, terrified I'd tipped him off somehow. But it wasn't suspicion, it was the opposite. It was a desperate man beginning to reach, exactly as Diane had predicted. I didn't answer. Not yet. You don't grab the line the second the fish touches the hook. You wait for him to take it deep. He did. Of course he did. A man doesn't fake his own death, abandon his identity, and blow up a woman's life for a fortune he intends to leave sitting in a vault. 3 weeks after we froze the account, Michael found he couldn't access his own money, and a man in that situation gets desperate, and desperate men make contact. He reached out, not to a lawyer, not to the bank, but to me, a burner number, a careful, testing message, and then a call, his voice in my ear for the first time in over a year, warm and awful and pretending. He had a whole story ready. He'd suffered a breakdown, a dissociative episode. He'd wandered away and lost himself. He was so ashamed, he wanted to come home and make it right. And, almost as an afterthought, so gently, he needed my help with a small legal snag on one of the accounts. There it was. He didn't want me. He wanted the key to the chest. I had been coached for this exact moment. I kept my voice soft. I kept him talking. I let the grieving, gullible grace he remembered come back into my voice, the one who'd leave the numbers to him. I said maybe we could meet. I said I still loved him. I said I'd help him sort out the account. Every word was recorded, and Diane had made sure the right people knew exactly where and when he planned to resurface. He walked into that meeting, a quiet cafe, chosen by me, arranged by me, with the confidence of a man who had never once, in his entire life, been outmaneuvered by his wife. I was there. I need you to know I was there, because I had earned it. I sat across from the man I'd buried, and I watched him do the thing he did best, reach for my hand, hold eye contact, lower his voice to that intimate register, and begin, so tenderly, to explain how we were going to fix everything together. And I let him, for about 90 seconds, long enough for him to say, on the record, in front of witnesses he didn't know were witnesses, the words that would end him, that he'd staged the accident, that he'd needed to disappear, that the money was ours and we just had to get it unfrozen. Then I set down my coffee, and I said the only thing I'd been waiting a year to say. You know what the strangest part was, Michael? I never believed you were dead, not for one day. I've sat with 100 dying people. I know exactly what it feels like when someone is really gone. I looked at him. You never felt gone. You just felt like a man who'd stepped out of the room. His face started to change, and behind him, the two people at the next table, who had been nursing their coffees for 20 minutes, stood up. I'm a nurse, Michael, I said quietly as they approached him. I know the difference between a dead man and a coward. You spent our whole marriage telling me I didn't understand the numbers. I gathered my bag and stood. Turns out I understood the only one that mattered. A dead man owns nothing. Michael was arrested at that table. Faking a death, insurance fraud, the fraudulent debts he'd opened in my name. Diane was right. It was federal, and it was not the kind of thing a warm voice and a good suit talks its way out of. The woman in the green dress, it turned out, hadn't known he was legally dead or that the money was stolen. She'd thought she was dating a charming, recently divorced financial advisor. She was gone before the arraignment. One more person Michael had lied to. The frozen account, nearly $600,000, flowed, through the estate, to me, his widow and beneficiary, exactly as Diane had promised. The fraudulent debts in my name were unwound the moment they were proven to be his crimes and not my signatures. The house was saved. My retirement, what could be recovered, was recovered. He had tried to bury me under his own failures and walk away clean. Instead, he made me his sole heir, handed me the fortune he'd stolen, and could not touch a cent of it without going to prison, which is where he went anyway. I kept working. I still sit with the dying. I still hold strangers' hands in their most honest hour. It's the truest thing I know how to do, but I do it now as a woman who trusts her own instincts completely, because in the worst year of my life, when every voice around me told me I was confused and grief-stricken and imagining things, my instincts were the only thing that never lied to me. There's a coda to this, and it belongs to Diane. When I went to her office to sign the final papers, I asked her about the name on that piece of paper. The one she'd written down before I ever said a word. The fingerprint she'd seen 3 times now. She looked at me for a long moment, deciding something. Then she said, "There's a man, I don't have his real name yet, only what he's called in certain rooms. He sells disappearances. He teaches men like your husband how to die on paper, hide the money, and leave their wives holding the debt. 3 of my clients now have been left in the wreckage of his handiwork." She squared a stack of papers on her desk. "I've spent years quietly collecting the pieces. You just gave me the biggest one yet." She walked me to the door. In her waiting room, 2 women sat. One reading, one just staring calmly at nothing. Both wearing that particular stillness I was starting to recognize as a kind of family resemblance. The stillness of women who'd been underestimated, and had decided, very quietly, to do something about it. "You'd be surprised how many of us there are," Diane said, following my gaze. "And we're not finished." I think about that word, us. They tell you you're confused. They tell you you're grieving. They tell you you don't understand the numbers, that you're just the face, that you're nothing, that you'll walk out with nothing. And one by one, quietly, we are finding each other, and we are learning to fight with paper. And we are not finished. End of episode 4.